Prepare, respond, survive. When seconds count, train with the best. Fire facilities, custom steel towers built for real world fire training. Be ready, be resilient.
All right, welcome to another edition of Fire and Training. I'm your host, Douglas Klein, and I'm excited about tonight's show. Looking forward to talking about company officers and some of the challenges that they're facing in today's environment, taking it from the station to the streets. Joining me on this edition of Fire and Training is my good friend and colleague, Christopher Nahm, and he's going to be engaging with me as we have some really tough conversations about what's going on with company officers, some of the challenges they're facing. And of course, our goal is to always provide the best training to our men and women in the streets so that everyone goes home. So Chris, welcome to another edition of Fire and Training.
Always a pleasure, Doug. Thanks.
You know, company officers, as we've known for many, many years, I know we went through the ISFSI program of the company officer series. We learned very early on that company officers are very, very pivotal in the infrastructure and the organizations that we serve in. They're also the true trainers of the fire service. And we used to think that we had a tough time, or it was a very critical components, and we were challenged as we were coming along as company officers back in the early 80s and into the 90s. But today's environment and our company officers are definitely facing a unique mountain challenge, as I call it. It's a huge mountain that they're having to navigate over, but the environment is very treacherous in a lot of different ways, and we're going to talk about that on the show. And what's your thoughts to that?
Well, you know, I think the diversity of where we've come from going all the way back into the 80s to current, you know, we've got a 40 plus year period of time, and the challenges continue, whether they be on the fire ground or certainly within the station setting, from HR to operational issues to training issues, human performance related conditions. The challenges continue to become mountable, but the time becomes less and less to be able to commit to all the things that are necessary for today's company officers.
Well, and I don't disagree. In fact, our call volumes have increased significantly. We see that on a regular basis. We see, you know, everything that from requirements, from regulatory to standards to the necessary training that we do to meet our missions that we're out there on the streets with. We're also in a time period where we have a diverse level of people that are out there from generations. We have multiple generations that are on the streets currently, probably more so than we've ever had in our fire service history when we've started blending these generations together, which is a challenge. But also, when we were coming along, there weren't cell phones, there weren't videos, there wasn't social media. Some of the challenges that we look at is our environments that are out there with the building environment. I know we've talked, length about that in many of our shows about the building environment, the construction, the tactics that have to go along with that. So let's take it from the station out to the streets, Chris. Let's talk about what's going on in the stations. Give me your thoughts of what company officers are facing.
I think, Doug, you just mentioned a couple of different things. The amount of distractions, I think, is paramount. It used to be pretty simple. We trained, we dealt with operational issues, we dealt with some of the administrative related conditions within the in the station setting. Currently, I think social media in itself has such a pronounced impact, both negative and positively, on the station environment, the manner in which we interface, the interpersonal aspects, and then certainly extending into the operational aspects. It becomes either an asset or a distraction. And that is probably the biggest challenge when we're looking for company unity, engagement in the firehouse setting, that used to be very much present, very well established, but becomes either filtered and in some instances diluted, or even evaporated. I think it in some station houses and at some kitchen tables, that type of integration and unity of company has diminished or completely gone away. And that is a direct result sometimes based on leadership or the lack thereof, the diminishment of standards of excellence and decorum and expectations. And I think fundamentally, it goes back to your last comment about the changes in generations at work. The generations of our work environment have dramatically changed as they currently exist. Some of the previous generations at work are becoming lesser and lesser pronounced, or actually are going away as retirements continue on. And we're seeing an entirely new set of generations or compositions of personnel that we do not have a lot of track record and experience with. So a lot of today's company officers that are part of those current generations are having difficulty in navigating, and many of our textbooks have not kept up with the current trends and how to deal with it. So when you look at the textbooks of yesterday, and by those even of 15 or 20 years ago, we have compositions within our firehouse settings that are very unique, are uncharted, and are very, very challenging at best.
And Chris, you hit upon a couple of things. And when you said the generations, I was thinking a good buddy of mine was talking about he left out and his kids were sitting at the table and they were texting on their phones, and he made a comment, sent a text in there about what they were doing. A few minutes later, his eldest child sent a picture back in the 60s, early 70s of a group of people sitting around the table looking at papers, the newspapers. So in a sense, we've changed the media that we were distracted by, but we want to focus on what's going on with the fact it's a phone versus it was a newspaper or a book or something to that effect. But again, part of what happens in each one of these generations is the importance of the need to communicate and to have good communications and even engage in very difficult conversations at times that people get uncomfortable with. They don't like to have those conversations. But as a company officer, and this is something that I share with company officers, in every class that I do and in programs and when I'm having one-on-ones with people, is as the company officer, you're actually, as Chase Sargent would say, you're the boss. You're no longer the buddy, but you're also the adult in the room. You're the one that has to make sure people are doing the right things and you're keeping them on the right path and taking them down the right roads, teaching them, the things they need to do. So it becomes very paramount inside of a station that company officers, become that leader. They become almost a parent figure. They're the coach, they're the mentor. They have many, many roles. Some of the same roles that we all learned when we were going through those programs. And again, part of what we've got to learn to do is how do you manage these people? And that was a topic that we talked about, when we went through as company officers. And there were programs at the National Fire Academy with interpersonal dynamics, group dynamics, organizational theories, phenomenal programs. And I think that's some of the soft skills, that's some of the things that we're missing in today's training programs for our company officers that they're not getting. And what's your thoughts to that?
Well, I think when we take a look at the interpersonal skills, they were based upon research that was drawn out of a different time frame that became correlated and then presented in the context of the time frame of the recent. In other words, if we did the research back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s and started applying it in the 70s and 80s, there was some continuity. I think one of the unique aspects here is that we have yet to fully appreciate how the current multiple generations at work are interfacing. And then that requires a whole different perspective on the types of interpersonal relationships, of which there are different principles, standards, and processes that may not have been fully explored. And that is a direct result of the complexity, the different layering of where society has currently placed us. So here we are in 2025, getting ready, going to go into 2026. I think the challenges of the last 20 years in particular are proving to present a lot more challenges than what we have maybe solutions for. So we're still learning about that. So part of the past methodologies and practices, when I open up an old book on interpersonal skills, although a lot of those traditional based things are always going to be present, I think there's a different perspective and spin that has yet to be fully explored and written to give us some guidance and direction on how to deal with the current multiple generations that in some instances share a lot of commonalities. So we used to have a little bit more of a distinctive separation of classes, of groups and such. And I think we have a much more degree of gray areas that further challenges today's company officers, especially when they are not too separated from their other colleagues. In other words, either there's a distinctive separation by age and some of the perspectives that make an individual from a certain generational group, but I also see that there's a lot of gray areas currently that create challenges, create either further conflicts or create further challenges, of which there are still uncharted areas to try to figure out and provide guidance to. The books haven't been fully explored and written, which is part of the challenges.
And I know social media, we both do a lot of social media. The kids do a lot of social media. And again, it's the content of what you're posting and how you post it and the timeliness of when some things get posted. But again, I don't think there's anything wrong. And I got a program that deals with the next generation. What are we going to do with them? And I hear all the time, and I remember back in 1979, the first day that I was actually in the fire service, I heard those same words. I don't know what we're going to do with this next generation. That goes back to a general that was talking about the greatest generation at the time of right before the war kicked off. And he was talking about the generation being lazy, not wanting to work and do the things they needed to do. But that turned out to be the greatest generation. And if we go back even deeper in time to Socrates' time and talk about, it was even said then, the next generation. It's always been the next generation. Well, I kind of relate that to the next generation. And I think about what they said about us, and I think we turned out okay. I think our generation's doing some phenomenal things for the fire service. I see the next generation kicking off and doing some really good things as well. But I think about the military, and the military takes, kids sometimes that we stereotype to, oh, they're never going to amount to anything. They went into the military. That's all they could do. But the military takes them and creates individuals that can perform at a very high level of performance. And they do their jobs, with pinpoint accuracy that requires precise precision. It's very complex. And oftentimes it costs millions of dollars. And I think about the time period that I was the duty chief when the Chinese air balloon was shot down over the international waters outside of Myrtle Beach. And anybody that's flying one of the planes that it's flying is generally somewhere between probably 22 and 28 years old that's flying that plane. And rarely do you have the people that are flying it or getting into flying those planes that are over 30 years of age. Most of the time, those are the younger pilots, and the older pilots move into a different role or into a different aircraft. But, pinpoint accuracy of shooting down the balloon with a Sidewinder missile, which is, close to $750,000 per missile to $1 million. The accuracy, the complex maneuvers that they did. Yeah, I mean, just the discipline that's there. And we talk about our generation not having that. I think a lot of that is taught and learned. And again, I go back to some of the research that I've done is we fail to engage this generation for some reason. We had people that engaged us and weren't afraid to engage us. For some reason, I watch individuals now and they're really afraid to engage this generation. They don't want to talk to this generation. They kind of just push them off to the side or whatever. And I think that's going to be a challenge for us going forward. And for company officers, that's one of the first challenges I want you to have is that you can't just push these people off. You can't say, oh, that's that next generation. Oh, they're not going to amount to anything. I think what you got to do is you got to pull them in and you've got to learn to connect with them. And that's where you get within the interpersonal dynamics that's required. And interpersonal dynamics have been going on for thousands of years. And again, that's just an component of a company also that they've got to do.
Well, I think you've got to be adaptive. You've got to sort of recognize the composition within your station house and then adapt to that accordingly and be able to have enough guidance or be astute enough through other mentors or through some of the things that you're learning as an individual to adapt and adjust and utilize some different techniques and communication skills in order to direct whatever the need may be in that conversation, whether it be just the conversation or training or disciplinary or administrative, whatever it may be. But the conversations need to be robust. They need to be rigorous when appropriate, and then just adjustable. Be adjusting to the circumstances, to the individuals, the conditions, the groups that may be present, however large or small within a single house or a single company or multiple company station and so forth. And that setting also adjusts when we go from the confines of the fire station to the fireground, where we're now dealing with communications and other aspects to deal with timeliness of fireground operations. That creates an entirely different perspective.
Well, you brought up the fireground, and let's kind of start out of the station now, Chris, and get to the field and begin talking about emergency responses and going out. Our populations have become very diverse as well in our communities all across the world. Our communities are becoming more and more diverse. There is a uniqueness in how long people live, the ages, the generations that we're all dealing with in the field. So this carries out to the field when you start dealing with your public. And I think that's an important aspect to talk about too, is our customers that we're serving and that we're going to and their expectations. I have folks that can't understand sometimes why we want to have the covering of tattoos, or why we can't have, really obscured hair colors, or, why we can't do certain things. And I think you have to begin marrying up to what your culture is within your communities that you're serving. And I know that, and I'm going to use my son for an example, in the station he's at, the area he's at, the people just don't trust anybody and everybody. They've got to see you. They got to know you. They got to earn that trust before they'll even let you in their house. And you're responding to emergencies, on a fire apparatus. But, one of the things that he's told me is that he's developed that type of trust with these people. And when there's somebody new at the station, they don't, maybe riding over or filling a seat, they don't want them in the house, and that's a culture that he has to share with them. So, our cultures are getting diverse in the field. And I think one of the things we don't study enough, and we talk about this for our buildings is you got to get out in your streets. You got to get out there and study. You've got to be paying very, very close attention to what's in your district. And I think the same thing goes to the cultures and the people that you got to be looking at.
You know, Doug, when you talk about some of the challenges as we transition from the station back to the streets and the fireground, today's company officer certainly has so many different challenges before them when we talk about fundamentals and then both intermediate and advanced level aspects. We continue to have so much information that gets pushed back down to the responsibility of the company officers, both from administrative, technical, and by technical, we're talking about so many different aspects that are drawn out of social media in particular, or the information coming out of our trade magazines, the information online and so forth, that is creating further and further challenges for being able to digest informational overload. And that becomes a challenge. You know, do we have company officers that are staying in touch or are tuning out because there is such an oversaturation of information? And at the end of the day, they just want to deal with their companies. They want to show up, deal with the demands associated with their response area, their public at large, and how they're servicing their clientele in their communities. And in many instances, there's either a very dynamic or very static type of environment. But the static environment creates complacency. The dynamic environments creates the potential for error-likely situations because of overload and just dealing with so many different distractions sometimes. So the challenges are not as simple as they were in a different time frame, that company officers could certainly adjust and meet those challenges over a period of time. Sometimes those challenges become overwhelming at best. And I think that in many instances, our company officers just don't have the time and in some instances the necessary tools to recognize what needs to be done. So although we are doing some great things operationally, we also sometimes see the results of that degree of ineffectiveness that manifest themselves in near misses, less than desirable after action reports, injuries, and in many instances, they result in the most undesirable of events where we have significant injuries or the line of duty deaths and conditions, both from the civilian standpoint of the public and the firefighting and emergency service standpoint.
Well, Chris, you know, in what you're talking about is you're exactly right. That goes from the people or the jurisdictions we're responding in, for the cultures that are there, for the types of buildings, for the challenges and tactical deployments, the resources that we have that we're deploying with, down to the challenges of what you're getting into, of getting shot at when you're pulling up on scene, being held hostage, going to, you know, structures that have things inside them that we didn't anticipate. And I've talked about some of the challenges I've run into over the years, but one of the most recent ones that I saw was multiple 20-pound LP gas cylinders stored in a closet on a fire. You know, fortunately, the fire was very, you know, small and it was contained very quickly. But can you imagine, you know, making entry on a fire that's in that area or that's impinging on those tanks that you don't even anticipate that being inside the room, or, you know, even, you know, just as we know, some of the drug labs that are showing up, we've had those line of duty deaths. Danville, Virginia, one particularly with a, you know, a meth lab that was there. You know, there's lots of things, and that goes back 20 plus years. I mean, this is not something that's new that we're running into. The challenges that they're going up against, and that's something that, you know, as company officers, it's so critical that you know your districts, you study your districts, you stay on the game, you interact with folks. It is a challenge. And when we talk about challenges, you know, some of the challenges that we faced are not near as complex in reality as what they're facing today, especially with some of the building constructions. And I know you got a series that's going on now. You're talking about a variety of new things that are coming out, and that's just something that's added. And this is taking off very, very quickly. We're watching our communities grow. Some of the areas of growth in South Carolina, I know, are astronomical. I'm seeing, growth throughout, the country of just, areas exploding, it seems like. So just a lot of things that are challenging our company officers, no matter where they're at in the fire service, no matter where they're going, what country, it doesn't matter. There are just ungodly amounts of challenges.
Well, the built environment continues to evolve at a faster pace than our methodologies and practices are allowing for. In other words, there are just about every single jurisdiction, large or small, rural to the metro, that are seeing dramatic influencers from the built environment, the aging of our structures, as well as the new conditions that are affecting the buildings. And the one commonality is that there's not enough time in anyone's schedules, on or off duty, to be able to commit to the necessary learnings to keep up with it. Or not only to keep up with it, or sometimes it's to catch up to it. So, you're playing catch up, or you think you're at the top of your game, and then suddenly there's a new set of buildings that are being built, or a different type of construction, materials, methods, fire dynamics. I mean, all of these different things that give us unique types of buildings and occupancies, fire ground parameters that change the rules of engagement, that change the rules of what everyone is familiar with. And that becomes part of the problem. We are either trying to catch up, trying to keep our heads above water. And in some instances, yeah, we are ahead of the curve, but it's very unlikely that you will stay ahead of the curve, because at some point you're going to lapse a little bit, and some things are going to, again, overwhelm you, that now suddenly you're back into the catch-up phase. So it's part of the challenge. Time management on today's fire service for company officers is difficult at best. It has to be managed, but there is no easy way to put it. There's diligence and effort that's required, sometimes 24/7. There's no longer that ability to turn the switch on and off when you're, either training or coming on shift or going to the station in a drill capacity on the volunteer side, whatever it may be. You've got to be fully committed, almost to that 24/7. And I say that sort of as a tongue in cheek, but the commitment far exceeds the availability of time, and having a balanced life cycle of family and other outside commitments and so forth. They have to be balanced, but the complexities of the job are becoming sometimes almost overwhelming. That does demand a lot more extra time to stay current.
Again, I go back to what I said in the very beginning. The company officer is from a fire chief's perspective, from a chief officer's perspective, the company officer is the key cog in the gear mechanism that makes the organization run. We can come up with the greatest of ideas, but it is that company officer that puts everything in motion. They're the ones that keep everything in motion. They're the face of the organization. They're the ones going out to the public. They're the ones making, complex tactical decisions, on the fly, on the go, in buildings, in environments, in situations that are deadly. I mean, we see that, and we've talked in our programs about errors and emissions, and how catastrophic that can be. And we've worked very diligently to get people to think in a broadened perspective with our 5-star command philosophy of looking at all these different components that go into it. I think some of the challenges that we're facing that are big challenges today is the station environment and the personnel, and being able to keep them focused and keep them from doing things they shouldn't be doing. And again, I go back to my component of being the adult in the room. But I also think that once we hit the streets, the complexities of the streets are so much different from the clientele that we respond to, from the situations we're responding to, whether it's medical, whether it's motor vehicle crashes, technical rescue, structural related incidents, the terrorism, anything that we're responding to in America's fire service today, in the world's fire service today, is more complex. It's more challenging. And now we throw this multi-generational, component on there. So lots of challenges. So as we go here, we could probably go for days and days and days and talk about challenges, but to kind of circle us around, wrap us to a good component of closing some things and closing in on towards the end of the show. What's some of your parting thoughts about how do we close these gaps and these challenges, Chris?
Well, I'll first say this, and you sort of set this up a moment ago. What we accept or disregard in the station environment ends up directly being reflected on what we end up doing or not doing on the fire ground. So there's a direct correlation of the station environment and the fire ground environment, and that becomes a challenge. It's not switch on, switch off. It's not we can act a certain way within the fire station setting and then expect a different type of performance, engagement, discipline, deliverables on the fire ground. So I think company officers clearly need to recognize that there's no separation, that it is a seamless element of two very distinct environments. One, again, a fire station, a firehouse, are homes in many instances that has different parameters, but a lot of different challenges, as does the fire ground that requires a whole other set of parameters, but they are directly correlated. They are directly connected. So I think the challenges going forward, as we just discussed briefly here in this episode, is that today's company officers need to be aware of their capabilities and their limitations and work to strengthen their limitations and identify how they can best achieve that. And then secondly, also identify those strengths and work in a very diligent manner to continue to improve them. So it's a continuous improvement process, and also recognize that it's a balanced approach toward dealing with your colleagues, those that you are supervising, those that you answer to. And it's only becoming more complex, but at the same time, it's all achievable. We've gone through that. Again, when we look at our careers of the last 40 plus years, we just put some things into a different point of context. We have some similarities, some differences, but at the same time, we have a very unique fire service today that will rise to the occasion. We have an extraordinary cadre of current and those that are upcoming to be company officers, and eventually with those that are company officers that are going to be commanders. And the fire service is still going to be left in good hands, but it takes a lot more focus and diligence in today's realm versus what we may have committed to yesterday.
Chris, I think that pretty well sums it up. Again, company officers are challenged, and it is a very challenging time, and it continues and will continue to be challenging for one of the what I call critical roles in the fire service. And it is the most critical role, in my opinion, for the fire service. And for the folks listening, I want to send a message about we need to be evolving and helping to develop these people as they step up, or people begin to prepare for these roles, as they get into these roles, that we continue to expand their abilities and then groom them into the next level of command in the organization itself. Again, we have to be on the forefront of recognizing what the next challenges are going to be and start preparing for that. And I think that's the uniqueness and Again, the built environment is one of those that we're very passionate about, that you have to be prepared for. Tactics wise, I talk a lot about tactics and the science that goes behind there. And we continue to study that science of, tactical fire deployments, what the fire is doing, how it behaves, what's the dynamics that go with that, what tactics work, what tools that we can put into play that are going to be better. The more knowledge we have, the better we're going to be at our game when it comes to the streets. But, the fires that we're putting out and that a lot of company officers are putting out are not out on the streets necessarily, but the fires that occur within the station are what I call dealing with your personal environment that you have there with personnel. And we know that the complexity of personnel is
a lot of balls. And those balls, whatever it is that you're juggling, but there's just so many things that are in the air that are in your hand that you're focusing in on. You just cannot lose track of all of the different aspects there. It's all doable. I mean, it's not always doom and gloom. It is certainly very doable, but it takes diligence, takes effort, takes sacrifice, it takes commitment to yourself, to your job, to your personnel that you're supervising.
Well, Chris, I certainly appreciate you joining me to talk about a topic that I think is very critical and something that I'm hearing company officers actually begin to talk about themselves. And, when they begin talking about the challenges or the need for help for their challenges, I think that's where we've got to respond as senior fire folks or the senior people in the organizations, and begin having these conversations and finding ways that we can help them. And hopefully for the folks listening, this has been helpful. I know there's a lot of challenges. The biggest thing that I will tell folks is if you're struggling a little bit, or you're getting ready to be a company officer, you're beginning to groom yourself, there's a lot of things you do for your professional development. And I'll be glad to, if you want to reach out to me. I'll be glad to talk about professional development with you. But again, we've got to focus on our most valued resource, and that's the personnel. And how do we connect with them? How do we dynamically interact with them? How do we bring this diverse group together to make a cohesive operational team? And how do we make it function at the highest of levels? I think that's a critical part. And how do we integrate then into the organization to accomplish the mission? So I think that's something that's there. Be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that, even though it's the fall now, I'm very excited about what's coming in the spring, and that is FDIC 2026, Chris. So I know that you and I both are going to be back out there at FDIC. You want to talk about what you're going to be presenting?
Just again, we're going to do 2.0. We're going to talk about the dynamic fireground, the influence of building construction on fireground decision making, with a whole different set of parameters. We're going to do a classroom session coming up in 2026, so we're looking forward to it. Again, my appreciation back to the entire board, to Diane and David and the entire staff there at Fire Engineering and FDIC for allowing the message to continue on. I'm looking forward to being back again, and certainly seeing a whole new cadre of students there in 2026.
Very excited myself. I'm 2 years back to back with the professional development of the next generation. Have had capacity or near capacity rooms for the classroom session. So this year, it was recommended last year to expand it to a pre-conference. So this year on Tuesday, I'm going to be doing a pre-conference, a 4-hour on professional development, which will allow us to have a little more time to be interactive and to be engaged, and actually have some more in-depth conversation and dialogue with the students that are going to be there. So if you're looking to learn about professional development and how you put a program together, how you look at the dynamics for a multitude of levels, I'll be there on Tuesday presenting that. Looking forward to it. And again, I'm with you, Chris. Thanks to the FDIC Advisory Board, to Diane, and nobody really understands what Diane and David and that whole group of people accomplish throughout the year to make FDIC the greatest show on earth. And it's just so humbling to see the work that they put in to create such a great show and to be a part of it. So look forward to that. So to our listeners, thank you for tuning in again to another edition of Fire and Training. I'm your host, Douglas Klein. And again, we're focused on making sure that everyone goes home. That's the men and women in the streets who are on the job, answering the alarms, responding to calls from home, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And we are dedicated to you and your family. So until next time, stay safe, train hard, and we look forward to seeing you on another edition of Fire and Training.
Prepare, respond, survive. When seconds count, train with the best. Fire facilities, custom steel towers built for real-world fire training. Be ready, be resilient.